for being here. My name is Matt Swartz. We're going to talk about anxiety and stress. That's our plan. If you guys would like my slides, I'm more than happy to. All you need to do is either scan that QR code right there, and it'll take you to a page. You just need to put in your name and email and check the little first box. I don't have a massive mailing list. Don't worry, you won't get a bunch of spam from me. I don't have time. But it will allow me to send you, it'll automatically send you those slides, and then you'll have them. We're not going to go through all the slides today. Alternatively, if you're not QR adept, you can go to bit.ly/anxiety stress MS for Made Simple. Just want to make sure we're here anyway. Might as well give you guys the resources. Cool. So what are we doing? We're doing Anxiety and Stress Made Simple. Let me walk you through our program for today. So goals, first chapter, educate, and they'll be through, if you guys didn't grab it, the QR code will be up in the right-hand corner almost at any point. So if you're like, didn't work, it'll be there. So first off, we're going to do some education on anxiety and stress. So what is anxiety? How does it work? Then what is stress? How does that impact anxiety? What's the relationship, right? And then looking at both anxiety, stress, and change, because they all kind of move together and impact each other. And then finally, we want to know, okay, great, Matt, you gave me all the education. What do I do with this, right? How can we improve anxiety and stress? And then how can we heal and transform, right? That's our goal. So a little bit about me just to start. Why am I up here? So I'm a Northville graduate myself. I went through first grade through 12, went to Moraine, went to Hillside, went to Northville, did the Alps program, and I dealt with anxiety as a kid. We kind of didn't know really until I got older exactly what was happening, but they did know I had ADHD, so I've been in therapy and took medication and all this. Grew up, moved out to New York for a while, went to grad school out there, did some crazy things. I was a prison therapist in Rikers Island for a couple of years, ran a federal probation and parole contract, and then decided to move back and went to private practice. I've been in private practice for about 10 years. Right now I'm entirely online. COVID kicked me online, and I said, you know what, I'm going to stay. My wife and I own a practice together online. My wife works more with younger kids, not just younger kids. She does kids and couples. Her name is Sarah. I mostly work with teens and up. I do a lot of work with parents, though. I honestly, we'll get into this, I would prefer to work with the parents because I feel like it makes a much bigger impact, right? So partially it's a personal journey, right? How can I be here, give back, give parents the information I wish my parents had had when I was a kid, right? But then also, just in general, this is what I do every single day, so I want to benefit anybody that I can. I do a lot of cool other stuff other than just private practice. I also do a lot of training and consulting with businesses around anxiety and stress, and flow state, which is what I'm doing the talk later on today, which is basically how to be a high performer in a healthy way. And then I also am building a mental health app. So I do a lot of cool stuff. Hello, Ms. Carla. Welcome. Great to see you. But today we're going to be talking about anxiety, and I hope you guys can benefit, and I hope your kids can benefit. So we're going to start at the top, anxiety disorders. What is anxiety, right? So we might have heard of different kinds of anxiety disorders. So general anxiety is the most common. This is, somebody who's walking around feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed in different ways. Also panic disorder, right? Kids or adults who have panic attacks. Social anxiety, some kids can navigate everything except social situations are really challenging. Then there's a specific phobia, right? Maybe I'm afraid of spiders or rats or something. That's an anxiety disorder as well. Then there's obsessive compulsive disorder, people who either have behaviors or obsessions around sort of managing their anxiety. And then there's post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And all of those fall into the umbrella of anxiety disorders. So how do we know this is a problem? Well, what we know is that 31, and by the way, this is the National Institute of Mental Health in America, 31.9% of teens have an anxiety disorder. So basically a third, right? 1/3 of teens have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. What does that mean? Probably the number is about double, right? Probably there's just as many kids undiagnosed as diagnosed. What does that mean? 2/3 of teens walking around this high school are dealing with anxiety in some way, shape, or form, right? It's a spectrum, so there's high anxiety, there's low anxiety, and there's everything in between. But even a little bit, right, can make an impact on our lives. But what we also know is that about 1/3 of those people that are diagnosed will even get treatment. So again, if we double that number, only about 1/6, right? Less than 20% of people that have anxiety will actually end up seeking treatment for it. And so that's pretty sad, right? So we want to make that more accessible. So that's teens. Overall, what we know is about 1/3 of Americans are going to have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And again, we'd probably suggest that's about double diagnosed. When we give young people, so they did the survey, ages 11 to 17, they just took a screening basically in school. 50% of them tested positive for severe anxiety. And so that's like, if you're rating that on a 5 scale, it was 4 or 5 out of 5, right? So 50% of young people tested for severe anxiety, let alone minor, right? So we know this is a problem. And we know this is a problem in our lives, right? Who hasn't had a moment or two of, right? Like stress and anxiety, this is all over the place. This is a real challenge. The good news is we're starting to talk about it more often. The good news is there's something we can do. But why is it worth my time talking about this stuff? That's kind of how I frame it. So let's make this super simple. Again, this course is called Anxiety and Stress Made Simple. So I want to break this down. How do we know if we have anxiety? What is anxiety? Well, there are 4 kinds of symptoms of anxiety that let us know what we're experiencing. The first is physical, things that our body are feeling. I'm going to read this like a medication commercial, okay? So things our body might feel include headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, muscle tension, shortness of breath, nausea, increased or irregular heart rate, shakes, tingling in the extremities, feeling lightheaded, restlessness, or issues sleeping, right? So everything is the answer, right? A lot of different physical symptoms that we might, maybe they're having a stomach issue. We take them to the stomach doctor, nothing's wrong, right? They're having headaches. We take them to a neurologist. We get an MRI, nothing's wrong. They're having chest palpitations. I have adults all the time. Adults will come to me. I was in the ER 3 times for a heart attack, and there was no heart attack, right? It was just panic attacks, right? So those physical symptoms often are the way people finally figure out they're having anxiety. Unfortunately, usually that's later in the process. By the time we've already gotten there, things have been adding up for a while, right? So what else is there? How can we tell? Also cognitive symptoms, so things we think. How do we know what we think might be anxiety if it's repeated, negative, and intrusive? Right? So we get repeated, it happens too much. We get negative, it doesn't feel good. The intrusive part is really important. It feels like it's coming at us, right? Like we're not choosing it, right? So maybe we're about to go to sleep at night and we can't stop the negative thoughts from occurring, or we're trying to talk with somebody and their back of the head keeps going, they don't like you, you're not good enough, right? Stuff like that. Those intrusive thoughts let us know we're really moving into that anxiety spectrum. So then third is behavioral, which is things we do, right? So we got body stuff, we got thought stuff, and we got action stuff. How do we know? There's a lot of different behaviors. People can do millions of things. We sort them into categories. Basically, we know it's an anxiety behavior if we're either avoiding too much, controlling too much, or people-pleasing too much, okay? Trying to make everybody happy. We all do all of these things a little, right? But when they become dominant enough that they're affecting our lives, that's how we know it's anxiety. And then finally, emotional. And these are things we feel, right? There's a lot of different emotions, but some of the key main emotions that we're looking for are going to be fear, sadness, anger, and guilt. If there's, again, we all experience these emotions, but if there's an excess of these emotions, right? If we're always angry, or we're always feeling sad, or we're always feeling guilty, or we're always feeling scared, that's a very key sign that we're dealing with a lot of anxiety. So, any questions about these 4 sets of symptoms? Does this make relative sense? Right? So I want you guys to be thinking about 2 things as we go through this. First, be thinking about your kids, right? What have I noticed in my kids? But then also maybe be thinking about ourselves, right? So this is the point in the discussion where I ask, who can tell me, in a small amount of people, so this will go quick, who can tell me what you think is the most productive intervention? In other words, what is the best thing we can do to help a child with anxiety? I'm going to have you guess now, and then I'll tell you at the end. Any guesses?
Take care of yourself.
Oh, man, you ruined the whole thing. No, that's great. I'll put the cards on the table. So it's actually not, you would think, the best thing I can do for my anxious kid is send my kid to therapy, right? The best thing you can do is you go to therapy. all of the research shows that parents who are in therapy decrease anxiety for their kids more rapidly than the kids in therapy. Pretty powerful, I think, right? And so I've been through different phases of therapy in my life. There have been times where, when I was a kid, I was in therapy. For me, a big watershed moment when I lived in New York for a while is I started having panic attacks. And so I had to go back to therapy. And then at another point, when I had my first kid, there was a lot of irritability for me. I was really, I was angry and I was snapping, and my wife said, "You need to go to therapy." I said, "Okay, I will." And at each stage in that journey, the therapy got a little deeper and got a little deeper and got a little deeper. And I was able to understand more and more about what was causing all this. Meanwhile, I'm a therapist, right? So I'm helping people. But as I learn about my own anxiety and my own trauma, I'm able to help my clients more and more and more. I remember before I went back to therapy, the most recent time for trauma stuff, at the time I had a very awesome, thriving practice. I was seeing, 30 to 35 people a week for anxiety. I had 2 groups going on. I had workshops every week. But I could see my clients kind of stalling out at a certain point. And then when I went back to that therapy and I did that work, what I noticed is now I was able to help my clients over that kind of next hump. Being able to deal with the deeper stuff. So it's just as true for your kids. You can send your kid to see somebody 1 hour a week, right? Or you can do that work, and then as they're seeing you all of those hours through the week, they can benefit from that. As we teach them, right? We lead them and we model. So, any thoughts or questions before I move on? Cool, right? All right, so we're going to talk about how stress and anxiety accumulate. Okay, so let's break this. So we've got the idea of the symptoms. Like, what does the process look like, either through the day or through the weeks, right? So this is what we call a feedback loop, right? When you're thinking about feedback, if I'm up here with a microphone and an amp, and I put them next to each other, right? What happens is a small sound going through the microphone goes back through the amp, feeds back through the microphone, and at the speed of sound, now it's screeching at you, right? And that's what's happening for somebody with anxiety, is it's going quick and it's adding up and it's adding up. So we want to interrupt that process. Okay, so the first thing that occurs, number 1 over there, is a cue or trigger, okay? That cue or trigger can be internal or external. What does that mean? It can be something inside my body, something going on physically, a thought I have, a feeling I have that starts my anxiety, or it can be something going on the outside, something a friend says or a teacher says or something that happens at home, right? So that's that cue or trigger. That sets off the process. Then there's going to be a state of mind. That state of mind is going to be some sort of typical thought or emotion pattern that comes up in response to anxiety. So again, it may be anger, or it may be guilt, or it may be fear, but there's some kind of, or maybe a thought like I'm not good enough, or there's no way I can handle this. Then oftentimes is when the physical symptoms kick in. Because we can't manage those thoughts or emotions. So I might experience pain in my stomach, or a headache, or shakes, or nerves, right? Then what comes is the behavior, step 4. I'm either going to try to avoid that feeling, avoid that experience, or I'm going to learn how to adjust to it and learn how to cope, right? So for instance, say I get anxious in crowded places and I go to Target, right? So I start walking into Target, I start feeling anxious, and I go, no, I can't do this, and I go home. Right? That would be the avoidance, right? Or I start walking and I can feel that distress and I just start breathing. I say, I can handle this. We can do this. It may be painful, but we're going to figure it out. And I work through Target. That's the coping, right? So it's really either avoidance or coping, one way or another. Now, either way, step 5, this is the magic step. Either way, no matter what you do, whether you avoid or cope, the anxiety will decrease. It's a biological experience. You can't stay anxious for 3 days. Sooner or later, it falls away, right? Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's hours, sometimes it's a day or 2, right? But sooner or later, that anxiety will decrease. And so the question is, number 6, what did we learn? Did we either learn to successfully cope, that we have the power to decrease our response to that trigger, or did we learn those avoidance behaviors that leave us feeling more powerless, that increase the response next time? Right? So every time I fight the feeling or avoid the feeling or avoid the challenge, it teaches my brain and my body, your teen's brain, your brain, that you can't handle it, and the anxiety the anxiety increases, right? So obviously, we want to learn how to cope, right? And so, that's the magic sauce. Making sense? Seeming fair? So if we can break this process down at any point, whether we can interrupt the trigger or interrupt that state of mind or address the physical symptom or change the behavior, any of those can make a difference. So we have a lot of points of intervention. There's no one right place, and it depends on the person. And that's where the art comes in, right? As I'm a therapist working with different individuals, everybody needs to intervene at a different place, and it depends on the person and their history, right? So I'm just skipping some slides because I'm not here, I'm not doing my whole program here. But who here has heard of neuroplasticity? Carla? Okay, so fancy sciencey word, but what it basically means is our brain has the ability to change, okay? So think of your brain like a grid of a bunch of little connections, right? And there are bigger roads and there are smaller roads. The bigger ones are the ones that we have traveled again and again and again and again, right? So if you have a kid who's always going, they won't like me, they won't like me, they won't like me, they won't like me, that social anxiety, that road gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? If we're gonna rewire the brain, if we're gonna change the responses, we need to not only decrease the old road, but also begin to increase a new road, right? And that can be a new way of thinking, a new way of feeling, a new way of behaving. So there's kind of I always say there's two things I'm doing every day. I'm working on healing, which is decreasing the old patterns, and I'm working on growth, which is increasing the new ones. So it's a little bit of left foot, a little bit of right foot, right? A little bit of growing, a little bit of healing. And you can't do them, you can't heal without growing, and you can't really grow without healing. So it's left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. Making sense? Great, cool. So one of the keys, who here has heard of mindfulness before? Right, most of us at this point, oh yeah, I saw it in Forbes, right? So mindfulness really is just this sort of overarching idea of how we can engage with our brain in our life. And I always say it's a framework for a peaceful brain and a peaceful life, right? So for me, anybody can benefit from mindfulness. What is it going to help us? It's going to help us reduce suffering. It's going to help us increase happiness. It's going to help us master our minds. So there's a lot to get out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down mindfulness to make it, so most of us when we think of mindfulness, we think of mindfulness practice, right? So do yoga or meditate or a specific behavior, right? But mindfulness also helps us understand how our brain and our life work. And what it does is it breaks down our experience of the world into 3 separate steps that are easy to understand. So the first is what we call perception, which is taking in information from the outside world, right? So I'm seeing, tasting, touching, smelling. I missed one, but you get the idea, right? Engaging in information through our senses, right? That's what we call the nervous system is all of our sensory organs, our brain and our spinal cord and our nerve endings that are responsible for processing what we're experiencing in our bodies or in the world around us. So all of that is perception. I'm cold, he smells, nice music, right? All of that is perception. Does that make sense? So just think of perception as taking in, right? And then we have interpretation, which is filtering that information, right? So who in here enjoys being more hot than cold? Who in here is more interested in cold than hot, right? So that's where interpretation comes in. I have a space heater underneath my desk at home, right? Because I like being hot, right? So, but some people prefer being cold. And so the idea is the same perception, the same information can mean 2 different things to 2 different people, or really 1,000,000 different things to 1,000,000 different people. So think of interpretation like a lens or a filter. And maybe for some of us that filter is red or green or blue. And white light is coming through that filter, and then it's looking different on the other side depending on that filter, right? So again, I could have maybe the same social interaction as you guys, and I go, that went great, and you guys went, that went horrible, right? Because my lens is green and yours is blue, so it looks different on the other side, even though we had the exact same experience. Does that make sense? Yeah, right. My partner says something, and I hear one thing, and they hear another thing, and how many times has that happened, right? So we take in the information, we filter that information, right, and then we respond to that information. We do something with it, right? So I have a social interaction. I think it went well. Great, love to see you again. You have a social interaction. You think it went poorly. You go, oh no, right? So our response is dictated by what we're taking in and how we're filtering. So my job, a lot of times people go to therapy or coaching or whatever, and they say, well, I want to change the way I'm responding. Cool. in order to do that, we need to change what we're picking up and how we're filtering it, right? A lot of times people who's ever tried to change a habit and it didn't work, right? Because we're focusing on this instead of focusing on this. And I'll get into this as we go, but the habits serve a need. And if you try to just quit the habit without addressing the need, then the habit's going to come right back, right? Does that make relative sense? Yeah, cool. So the idea is if we can break this down, we can improve our anxiety, we can improve our kids' anxiety, and I'm going to make this super simple. So I have a 4-step process that I use, I call SAFE, to reduce stress and anxiety. We're going to focus on the first 3 steps today because it's what's digestible within a 50-minute talk, right? So we're going to focus on simplify, adapt, and fulfill, okay? One at a time. So let's talk about simplify, which is what we're trying to, the 2 frameworks are connected. What did I just do? There we go. I'm trying to simplify to improve perception. I'm trying to adapt to improve interpretation. And again, if you want the QR codes right up there, all these slides are available, right? So let's start with simplify. So this is a kind of complex slide, and I actually do a whole hour-and-a-half talk just on this slide. So I'm going to kind of breeze through this. There's a lot more depth here, but I don't want to confuse you guys, and I don't have time. But this is this is my little invention called the nervous system scale. I told you we talk about change and how we respond to change, right? So this is all about responding to change. If you think about it, if nothing's changing, there's no anxiety or stress, right? If I'm just sitting still on the couch and nothing's happening, we're good, right? But the second something starts to change, that's when my nervous system gets engaged. We call the first step arousal. So arousal is just, there's a stimuli. Something's happening, right? So maybe I hear the TV in the other room, or my phone's ringing, or my kid yells, or the doorbell rings, right? I hear an alarm clock, right? There's some kind of something happening. That's arousal, okay? So one of the problems in our current society, which we're all becoming very aware of, especially post-COVID, is that there's too much going on. There's too much stimuli, right? You get on your little phone portal, and there are a million things, too much so that you can never do, right? And we start to get overwhelmed. So the more things that start to arouse us, we start to move into stress. I want you guys to think of your nervous systems like a 4-lane highway. So there's 2 lanes going in and 2 lanes going out. Right? As we start to collect change and stimuli and things going on, we start to put cars on that highway. If there's more cars coming in than can come out, we start to get a traffic jam. The cars start slowing down. If we keep shoving things on the highway, eventually the cars start crashing into each other, right? If you think to when you guys grew up, maybe not when you grew up, I don't know, but if you think about the 50s, 60s, there were 4 television stations, right? And now there's a million, billion, trillion, right? There was, in the 30s and the 40s, right? There was radio and books, right? There was so much empty space. There was so much downtime that doesn't exist anymore. There's no downtime anymore. So we're just filling the cars, filling the cars, filling the cars. Of course, our head is getting into car accidents all day, right? So I know this seems obvious, but it's really important that if we don't want to keep getting into car accidents in our head, we got to decrease that arousal, right? So if that arousal becomes too much, we start moving into stress. And again, stress is just thinking too many cars on the highway, right? Stress is too much stimuli to process, okay? As that stress adds up, it starts to become pain, okay? If you think about pushing on something physical, we would call a little push stress, right? And if I start to push too far, I can start to feel a little pain here, right? So that's kind of the difference. Too much strain on your nervous system. A little stress we can handle, too much stress we can't. And then as the stress accumulates, it starts to become really painful. Stop, right? My kids are running around, it's bedtime. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. My kids are running around, it's bedtime, and I start to feel, it almost feels emotionally painful to me. We're supposed to be doing this, and then I get angry, right? So that's that movement from stress into pain, right? So here's what happens if we don't correct that pain. When I yell at my kids to stop, don't yell at your kids. When I tell my kids to stop, right, I'm trying to get rid of some of that pain. If I don't get rid of the pain, eventually it turns into an injury. So I won't do it here, but if I kept pushing my finger back from the pain position, eventually it would snap, right? We call that an injury. If we get a physical injury in our lives, it prevents us from meeting a need. Or if I break my leg, I can't walk to the kitchen, right? If I break my arm, I can't pick things up, right? If I have an emotional injury, an injury from stress or trauma, right, then that emotional injury prevents me from meeting my emotional needs. What are those? We'll go into it a little bit, but it's my needs for connection, my needs for safety, my needs for identity, right? If I get bullied, it becomes harder to socialize and harder to connect and harder to meet my emotional need for connection, right? And so at some point, and we're not really going into this today because this is a little too deep, but how can we heal those emotional injuries so that we can change that process, right? So, but for today, we get that emotional injury. What happens, right? Then it's going to produce fear. Why? If I burn my hand on a stove, now I'm afraid of putting my hand on the stove for good reason. It protects me, right? Don't do that again. Don't get hurt. But what if you get scared of something that you need to do in order to feel okay, right? If we get scared of socializing or get scared of taking risks or get scared of taking a test, right? So now that fear produced by that injury becomes so prevalent in my life that I don't know how to negotiate it. I start fighting against it. That's anxiety. Anxiety is ultimately fear of fear. I begin pushing against and resisting the fear. Fear is an important response. All emotions are good. They become dysfunctional when we don't process them or don't use them effectively. Anger is not bad. It's important. So is guilt. So is sadness. So is fear. But when we create a resistant, negative relationship with our emotions, that's where the anxiety starts to accumulate, right? What am I fighting? I'm fighting myself. Right? The anxiety, nothing's actually happening except what's going on in my brain and my body. I'm getting in a fight with my own protective fear system. So as the anxiety builds, the anxiety builds, the anxiety builds, then it can become trauma, right? Something so painful that we can't fully work through it emotionally, right? So when I'm doing therapy, I'm helping people who have ended up on this side, right? Again, most of the time, unfortunately, people don't get to me usually until they're right here. But what I really love is I love also helping people work on this side once we've corrected for this emotional injury, work on this side so they don't keep getting over there, right? So I usually have 2 stages in my treatment. First stage is do this work, and then second stage is do this work. Now, of course, it kind of goes side by side because I need to deal with my stress so I'm not constantly overwhelmed. It's not like first and then second, but both of those parts are important. So does that make sense how these things add up? Right? And again, humans are really good at dealing with one of these challenges or one of these bad things, but the problem is when it's time after time after time after time, and it adds up and it adds up and it adds up. Any questions about this? So again, the slides you'll find go into it more deeply, but I don't want to overwhelm us. What I do want to talk about, well, actually, I'm going to get to this later. Never mind. So what can we do, right? Matt, I've been sitting here, I buy this, I understand. What can we do? Okay, so the first set of skills that I'll recommend are skills to address our perception, right? If we're taking in information and it's causing us, challenge, what can we do immediately in the present moment to feel better? And it's really, I sort them into 2 categories. Either reduce what's coming in, reduce the stimuli, or increase it to kind of mask it a little. So in reducing stimuli, one option is separate and try to do some breathing exercises, right? Go in a quiet place, do some breathing exercises, calm your body down. There's a lot of different kinds of breathing exercises. You can Google or YouTube different breathing exercises. I recommend what's called paced breathing. So I'm just simply going to breathe in slowly for about 6 to 8 seconds. I'm going to hold it for about 6 seconds. And then I'm going to breathe out even more slowly, 8 or 10 seconds. When I'm breathing out, I encourage people to purse their lips like they have a straw to slow the breath, right? So that you get the idea. One time won't work. The research shows that for most people, it's about 5 to 10 minutes of that where we see the effect. And most people punk out after about 2 or 3 minutes because it's really boring, right? But what this does is it sends the signal to our nervous system that we're safe. If we do that consistently for about 5 to 10 minutes, it's almost impossible, unless we're like really on the panic side, it's almost impossible for your brain and your body not to slow down, okay? Next, what can I do? Change my environment. Move myself to a less stimulating environment, right? So some kids that have anxiety, they'll have these 504 plans in school that allow them to go to a quiet room, right? Why? Because we need to clear out some of the cars on the highway. So maybe that's going outside for a walk. Maybe that's going to a quiet room, right? Depends on the person, depends on the situation. Next is simplify. This is more of like a long-term thing, right? How can I begin to reduce the amount of stuff that's going on in my life? I need to have my kids in 5 different activities, not if they're anxious. That may not be good for them, right? Now, everybody's different. Some kids with anxiety need a lot of stimuli, some need less, but there are occasions where we may be overstimulating our children. Obviously, I don't have to tell you, phones and YouTube and TikTok and blah, 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 and all of that, right? Which, of course, is its own challenge and problem and is a significant contributor to anxiety, ours as well as our kids, right? So we do want to simplify, and that's a whole journey, but it's important. And then finally, I'm a big fan of meditation, right? And the point of meditation, so many people are like, oh, I want to quiet my mind. And if you've ever sat down to try to meditate, you know that that's not the initial experience. It's very busy and it's very distressing. So when I'm teaching people to meditate, what I'm encouraging people to do is think about it like pooping for your brain, right? Set aside 10 minutes to let your brain just let all the crap go, right? So it may be a little distressing, but it's because all of the garbage and the junk is like kind of displaying itself on the screen, right? So we have to feel it to release it. So the point isn't after 10 minutes of meditation, I want to feel better. The point is after 10 minutes of meditation, I will have let some of this junk go. As we get better and better and better and better, we're going to see more and more clear space. It's going to get easier and easier if I can get somebody to, so I've been meditating for probably almost 20 years at this point. So my experience of meditation is very different, obviously, than somebody who's just starting. But when you're just starting, setting that bar way too high is what makes people kind of punk out, right? So just got to get it out, right? That's all we're doing. So that's one set. The second set is sometimes you need to increase the stimuli, right? If the anxiety is going on inside the body, what can I take in that's going to sort of hack or interrupt that process? Cold temperature is very good for this. Dousing your face with cold water, sucking on some ice cubes, going outside into the cold weather, putting your face in front of an air conditioner. There's something called the diving reflex. If you fill a bathtub or a sink up with water and stop it and put your face in it for about 30 seconds, you will find even if you're having quite an intense experience of anxiety or stress, it will decrease pretty rapidly. There is this just biological trigger that when we go underwater, our fight or flight system changes. So that's cold temperature and also the diving reflex. Music has also been shown, research shows music's really effective, but you want to find music at about, if the kid likes the music, let them listen to whatever music they want to listen to. But the research shows 70 beats per minute is going to slow our anxiety and slow our heart rate. What's it about 70 beats per minute? Classical music, ambient meditation music, spa music, right? I have a spa playlist, right? I'm not going to the spa, but it helps regulate my nervous system. Shift your mood with media, right? What does that mean? If you're feeling sad, watch a happy movie, right? Or if you're feeling sad, watch a sad movie. Sometimes it's you want to copy the feeling. Sometimes you want to shift into a different feeling. But whether it's, reading or watching TV or using music, right? We want to shift that mood. And then finally is distraction, right? Can we do something to distract ourselves? Now, some of these tools are going to be better or worse depending on the person, but I want to help anybody I'm working with, I want to help them build a toolbox of skills so they have a variety of different options. They can test out what works for them. When I'm going through these things, I always encourage people to pick one of these you're already good at that you want to use more often, and pick one of them that you think would be helpful but you're not good at that you want to learn. That way we're not overwhelming ourselves. Don't pick 8 things, right? Pick 1 or 2. And work on those. And then if you do that really well for a month or 2, then you can add in something else. Any questions about any of these tools?
I don't know if this question is too specific, but based on what you're saying about media,
Yeah.
how do you think about meditation videos?
Yeah, I mean, again, so I come from what's called a harm reduction approach, which is basically like whatever works, man, right? Like, we want everybody starting at a different place, right?
Okay.
So I actually, I'm developing a mental health app that uses visuals, in order to help engage some of the anxiety. So yeah, for some people it's like, I just want to hear it. For other people it's, I want to see it. If that's the good starting point, great. They may decide eventually they want it to be calmer and calmer and calmer, but if we have a really overactivated nervous system, going from here to nothing is really distressing. So, like being able to graduate and phase down over time can be really effective.
Okay.
So yeah, make sense? Feel
Yes,
good?
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, we're going to go. I'm noticing my time. I'm just going to truck. So now we're going to talk about stage number 2, which is adapt. When I say adapt, what do I mean? Well, so if we can figure out how to adjust to the experience going on, right, we're going to be more successful. Part number 1 says, let's remove stuff that's overwhelming. Part number 2 says, in the face of what's overwhelming, how can we change it? So if I'm not stopping what's happening, how can I adjust? This is where my interpretation comes in, right? So if I'm walking down the street and I see a dog and you see a dog, and I was bit by a dog as a kid, but you have a dog and you love it, you're going to see that dog, you're going to go, oh, yay, puppy, and I'm going to go, ah, puppy, right? And so, but it's the same puppy, and it's not going to bite either of us, and you're going to have a nice day, and I'm going to be jacked up for a half an hour. So how do I adjust my experience so that I don't end up being in distress? So of course it's an art and it's a science and it happens over time, but it's a process that I call mental digestion, okay? Here's the way I want you to think about it. There's 2 keys. We have a state of mind in a moment, right? I might be angry, happy, sad, guilty, right? And then we have our model of the world. Our model of the world is what's hanging out in the background. It's all of the stuff that's stored in our brain and our body from all of our past experiences. And then an experience happens. And based on that model, it creates a state of mind, okay? So if my model says dogs are bad, and I see a dog, the state of mind is fear, right? If my model says dogs are good, and I see a dog, my state of mind is happy, right? And then depending on whether I'm happy or scared, I'm going to respond differently, right? And then that's going to either confirm or challenge that model of the world. So the very simple process of really good therapy is I'm just continuing to edit this, right? Where do I have an impact? Is in either of these 2 places. Either when I notice a negative state of mind, I can do something about it, right? And each different set of thoughts or emotions might need to be worked with differently. Or if in downtime, when something's not happening, I can edit my model of the world, right? So if I'm going to therapy and there's been no crisis this week, then we're talking about really some of those deeper things. We're editing that model of the world. Versus if there's a crisis or a challenge, then we're more addressing that state of mind, right? So again, a little work here, a little work here. Slowly over time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to digest the crud that's stored up in our nervous system. Think of your brain, your nervous system, like a basement with a bunch of stuff that's been stored up over time. Boxes of this, totes of that, things on the ground, right? And we want to clean that up, probably throw away half of it, and then figure out what is there that is important that we want to keep. And so I call it digestion for a reason, because it's like eating an apple. If I eat an apple, there's going to be 2 parts of that apple. There's going to be the stuff, the energy that I want to take away from it, the nutrients, the positive stuff, and there's the waste product, right, that I end up passing through my digestive system. The same is true of all of the stuff that's stored in our brain and our body, right? We can digest through it, figure out what's good that we want to save, and figure out what's dysfunctional that we want to let go of. Make sense? Seem fair? Again, I can say that. It's a hard process. This is the hardest thing to do, really, is continue to edit this. But basically, it's how do I create a model of the world that leads to peace and joy and happiness as much as humanly possible, right? So one of the things I joked, one of the things I'm working on editing for my model of the world is bedtime isn't going to go the way I want it to go, right? You guys have older kids. You're pros. You've already figured that out. I'm still, right? But it's a joke, but it's serious because it's really, life is really made up of those little things, right? Like, okay, am I going to get angry when my kid doesn't get their homework done? Or am I going to allow them to suffer their own consequences, right? And a lot of the time, a lot of this model of the world, we're in resistance to the negative things, which just creates more distress and more distress. Does this make relative sense? So again, art, not a science. There's a lot of things that we can do here, but basically what I want to draw your attention to is this idea that there's different ways to engage in stress and pain, okay? So the first, what most people do, I would say probably 80 to 90%, they try to distract themselves from their pain. They try to suppress the pain, compartmentalize, project it at others, internalize it at themselves. Why do we do it? It's survival instincts, and it's also probably the best we've been taught. This is what our parents did, right? They, crack the Bud Light and watch NASCAR or whatever, right? The problem is that these things only work short term, but then they become long-term destructive patterns, right? So no problem with a glass of wine. But if we're drinking a bottle every night to cope, not good, right? No problem with an episode on Netflix. But if we're watching 3 episodes every day to try to get through, not good, right? So distraction has a place, but it's not a long-term beneficial experience, right? So then hopefully we start going to therapy, we move into coping, right? I want to figure out how to soothe myself in the moment and manage my stress. I'm going to learn self-care coping behaviors. I'm going to learn how to challenge my thoughts. I'm going to learn how to implement different behaviors, right? This is great, but the problem is this is kind of like bailing out a sinking ship, right? It helps, but I'm not actually addressing the underlying problem. I'm just getting better at getting the water out of the boat, right? So what comes next? And this is gonna be the last point I'm gonna make in a second, is growing, right? How do I gain energy? How do I meet my needs, right? If I'm walking around with an empty tank all the time, I'm not gonna be effective. How do I fill that tank up? Not just spend it, right? I go to sleep, I wake up with a 75% full tank, I go through my day, I spend it, I wake up again, right? No. We need to make sure we're filling that tank throughout the day so that we can spend it on the things that we want to spend it on. Once we have enough fuel in that tank, we can move into healing, right? How do I not just cope with the pain in the moment, but see the pain as an indication of that model of the world going on in the background of my head, so I can begin healing it little by little, right? Whether I have some of those emotional injuries, right? Whether I'm working through, some pain that's accumulated over time, we want to be able to move into that healing. And then finally, and again, I don't really get into this, but evolving would mean being able to capture that stress and pain and ultimately turn it into creative energy rather than just a problem. So there's this whole mindset shift that goes, instead of trying to avoid or stop pain, I'm actually now able to feed off of it and utilize it to create what I want to create. So I think most of the time people coming to my talks, we're really focusing on these 3 areas. So I'm going to end with growing here in a second. So I don't have time to get into all of the coping skills for interpretation, but these are the things that you learn in really good therapy. Some of the things we can look at are, can I understand my expectations and start working to accept and release them? Again, I gave the bedtime example, right? Maybe my expectations, the gap between what's happening and what I want to happen is so big, it's causing me so much pain. How can I reduce that, right? I can learn how to regulate my body better. Again, some of the things we talked about, breathing exercises, exercising more, doing things that are good for my body. I might be able to engage in some thought challenging, noticing negative thoughts, beginning to try to dispute them a little more, learning how to emotionally process, learning how to work through my negative emotions, growing my self-esteem, right? The first one, becoming the observer of my thoughts and feelings instead of getting trapped in them. And again, I wish I had time to kind of go through all of these one by one, but I'm more trying to show you there's a bunch of ways to work through this stuff. And whether you want to do some of that on your own, reading some self-help books, watching some YouTube videos, whether you want to go to therapy, go to coaching, right? The more you guys can figure out how to do this stuff, the more you can teach your kids. And that's really important. So finally, in the fulfill category is, how can I fill that tank, right? So not just fighting anxiety, but how can I fill that tank so I can heal the anxiety? So has anybody heard of Maslow's hierarchy before? Yeah, right. So it's a really simple system to think about what my needs are and how to fill them. So on the bottom, it's my physiological needs. What are my physiological needs? I need to sleep, I need to eat, I need to breathe, I need to drink water, I need to move my body. Nature, I would also include in that category. Having some connection with nature is really important. I did mention, it's a pyramid, which is to say that we need to have a really good foundation on the bottom if we want to climb the pyramid. Most people come to me, they think they're working on these things, but their pyramid is small on the bottom and big on the top, so it's kind of unwieldy and it keeps falling over. So sometimes we have to go back to the bottom. Next is safety. This is both physical safety, but usually in Northville, we've got that figured out. It's psychological safety is the second part, and that has to do with the expectations in my head that say, I'll be okay when what, right? How much money do I have to have in the bank? How many loans should I pay off? It's levels of certainty and predictability and all of these different things. And the challenge is most of the time we're setting ourselves up for failure because the level of expectation we have about what safety looks like is really just a fantasy or an idea rather than a reality. And that, if we look back, we're like, I've been safe this whole time, but I didn't feel safe half of the time, right? How can I correct that? Again, that has to do sometimes with the emotional injuries, the challenges we've had in our lives, or just the expectations we have. Next is connection, our relationships, intimate partner, family, friends, right? And it's not just more relationships, it's quality relationships. Relationships with people that make me feel like I can be my authentic self and that I belong and I receive love and connection in exchange, right? Next is my esteem, which is like more like my identity, right? Who am I and what's my positive impact on the world? And it doesn't have to be I have a mega corporate. It can be I'm here to help my kids navigate the world, right? It can be I'm here to help my friends feel good about themselves. It can be I'm here to cook really good food, to have fun, to explore the world, right? It doesn't have to be a giant big thing, right? But it is who am I? And then finally is actualization, and this is like, how can I be the best version of myself? How can I grow? How can I impact more people? How can I make the world a better place, right? But again, we can't really worry about that, which, by the way, a big part of actualization is being a really good parent, right? Being able to be a really dialed in, really loving, really supportive parent. Your kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, there's nobody in the world that will impact them as much as you will, right? And so for me, that's a really important part. So in order to get up here, I need to make sure these things are dialed in. But so often we're overlooking these things and we end up focusing too much on these things. So we want to balance all of that out. So fulfillment really is beginning to explore that idea of what are my needs and how do I meet them in a consistent, sustainable way. We've all heard that word fulfillment, right? I want to live a fulfilling life, right? And there is a feeling of wholeness to that, of groundedness. And it's not get to one magic thing, climb the mountain, and I'm done. Fulfillment is in the same way that you need to eat every day. It's this ongoing, sustainable process of meeting my needs. The more I am focused on meeting those needs, the more I will be able to help other people figure out how to meet their needs, which is different than meeting somebody else's needs. Now, this is different for a 5-year-old than it is a 15-year-old, right? But if you have a 15-year-old and you are responsible for meeting their needs, we have a problem, right? The 15-year-old is supposed to be learning how to meet their own needs. Even young kids, my 5-year-old, right? I want to be giving him as many opportunities as possible to engage. Instead of cleaning up for him, I want to be cleaning up with him so that he can clean up on his own, right? That's just an example. But, tidy room feels better, right? I want to teach him that. I want to help him meet his needs in the beginning so that we can work on meeting our needs together and then ultimately put him in a position where he can meet his own needs, right? So often we are creating, we say we want independent children, but we're actually creating a lot of codependent children because we as parents want them to be happy, so we're trying to meet all of their needs, but then they don't learn how to meet their own needs. And then they end up in anxiety because they don't understand that their tank is empty and they keep trying to do all of this good stuff, but they didn't learn how to fill their tank along the way. And so now they're just depleted all the time. And that's what happened to me, right? I was in New York, I was off on my own, I was trying to conquer the world, and I started having panic attacks because I didn't know what my needs were. I didn't know how to meet them. And so I was burning myself out every day, trying to make everybody around me happy so that maybe they would take care of me. And that's not a long-term sustainable pattern. Does that make relative sense, right? So I always tell people, I don't think we really want to raise independent children because independent would mean they're off on their own in a box somewhere, never connected with anybody, right? We want to raise interdependent children. We want to raise children to be part of the interconnected system that's all around us, right? And the problem is when we don't work through that codependence, we create, codependence is the exact opposite of interdependence. Codependence is trying to make everybody around you happy so that they'll take care of you, right? Interdependence is I'm able to meet enough of my needs and then naturally give what I have to give and then naturally get back the other things that I need. Interdependence is a much softer, subtler experience than the experience of control. Right? So I want to get you guys out of here, but I want to tell you one more thing before we go, maybe. When I'm trying to figure out, okay, there's a lot of noise here, right? How can we break this down, okay? What I encourage people to do is go on a 6-month journey to add one little thing at a time each month to gain a set of skills that will help them meet their needs and will help them create a meaningful life, okay? So if we're just starting February, so let's say February. February is gratitude month. I want to spend 3 minutes a day maybe, whether it's at the beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day, focusing on 3, 4, 5 things that I'm grateful for. Ideally, we would write this down in full sentences. I am grateful for my kids. I am grateful for the sun. I don't care. It can be big things, it can be small things, right? But this practice of gratitude runs counter to the practice of expectation, which is to say, instead of sitting there going, I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more, we're sitting there going, I have so much. I am so blessed. I am so lucky. And that starts to put our nervous system in a state of safety. The more we can do that every day, the more habitual that practice becomes, the more safety we're giving to our body, okay? So that's February. March, let's say, and you don't have to go in my order, this is just a suggestion, right? March is stillness month. What does that mean? I want to find 10 minutes a day that I can be still, okay? Throw away the phone, turn off the laptop, turn off the TV. It doesn't have to be totally quiet, right? But get into a place where you just sit still for 10 minutes. That could be meditation, or it can just be sitting, right? You drink a cup of tea, do whatever you want to do, but just be still. Now, again, at the beginning, it may be distressing because all of the junk from your nervous system is going to come up. But over time, again, in the beginning, just see it as poop. I'm just pooping out the junk. Yep, it's going to feel yucky, pooping it out, right? But as time goes on over the month, you'll find that practice to be more and more calming. And then you'll be able to bring that practice into other more challenging areas, right? So stillness to regulate our body. Then next is movement. So February, March, April. April is movement month. Again, 10 minutes a day of movement. I don't care whether you walk, stretch on the floor, do yoga, go for a run, kayak, I don't care. Just do something that helps you move, okay? Jumping jacks, I don't care, right? That 10 minutes a day hopefully will become more, but in the beginning, I'll take 10 minutes. April. May is kindness month. Do one thing a day kind for somebody. Doesn't have to be big. Tell them they're wearing a nice shirt. Hold the door for them, right? Tell your kid how smart they are. It doesn't matter, right? Just do one kind thing. This triggers a bunch of different neurochemicals, but again, we're trying to meet that connection need, but we're also trying to help ourselves feel safe. Kindness does both. February, March, April, May, June. June is going to be belonging month. Belonging month is I want to find a space where, again, I can be my authentic self and validate others for the same. So that may mean I already have some good friends that I can be with, that I just want to be conscious about spending time with them as frequently as possible. For some of us, we may say, I really don't have a group of people I feel like I can be myself with. Well, then you got to start the journey. Go join a book club or a knitting club or an activity or something. Begin to try to meet people that share your values and your interests. You can create some meaningful relationships. February, March, April, May, June. July is creation month. Spend 10 minutes a day doing something creative. I don't care whether you're doing an adult coloring book or dancing in your underwear or singing or something more complex than that. Just being a little creative. Ideally, if we could do these things with our kids, right? So I'm just trying to implement little practices at a time. If 10 minutes is too much for the kids, not a problem. So before we go, I'll just tell you about my nighttime ritual. So I have a nighttime ritual with my kids where we brush our teeth, put our pajamas on. We sit in a room for about 10 minutes, okay? The first thing we do is we do a little yoga. We just try to move our bodies, right? Just 2 minutes of moving our bodies in an interesting way. Sometimes it's more hyper, sometimes it's more calm. Depends on their energy level. Then we do just a little breathing. We do something called a candle breath. So we just do 5 breaths in and out. I'm blowing out the candles on my birthday cake one at a time, right? The kids love that. Then we do a little bit of gratitude. My 2-year-old can't do it, my 5-year-old can, right? What's one thing you're grateful for today? We also ask what else they're feeling. And then gratitude, and then we do a little mantra. It's kind of, instead of a prayer, we do, and it's just these cute little, I am peace, I am love, I am kind, I am wise. It doesn't matter, but the idea is we're trying to reaffirm our positive qualities to ourselves, right? So it takes 10 minutes a day. That's all that is. But I'm trying to work in a couple of these. I'm trying to do them with my kids, and then over time they become more and more natural, more and more natural. So look, I know I gave you a lot of stuff today. Most people are going to walk out the door and you're never going to see me again, and I just wish you well. If there's any way I can help you in continuing the journey, you can reach out to me. Again, the info is on the slides. Call me, email me. Happy to talk to anybody. I'll talk to anybody for free for 20 minutes, if you want to kind of get a little perspective on, like, hey, would this be helpful for me? Would this not be helpful for me? I also have a group I do online every Monday from 6 to 7. It's a group called Growing Together. It's people who are interested in sort of this personal growth. It's a community. It's a community of people doing this personal growth every week. Most of the people are doing therapy or coaching as well, and we're just invested in being with each other and growing together. If I can be helpful, great. If not, totally get it. Take my information. I hope it benefits you guys. I just want your lives to be better and your kids' lives to be better. I hope I was helpful. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely.